Which part of the novel do you start writing first? Do you start with the middle, the end, the beginning? We're going to be answering that question, and we're starting right now. There is this idea that new writers have that if you want to start writing a novel, you have to start on page 1, line 1 with the first word, and you have to write chapter to chapter from the beginning, middle, to the end. And that if you don't start at the beginning, then that's it, you cannot start. You have to start at the beginning. The truth is, as a writer, you can start anywhere you want in your novel. If you have an idea for the middle, well, you don't have to just sit there and wait until the beginning comes to you. You can actually start right away. Get down every idea that you have on paper as soon as possible, even if it is in point form. The most important thing is you got to start writing. If you have that spark, that idea for a novel, start writing it as fast as possible. That's when you're going to be writing the most, with the most amount of energy. Some writers come up with an idea for the beginning, but they don't quite have the ending, so they just don't write at all. They keep waiting until that ending comes to them mysteriously. The fact is, if you have the idea for a beginning without the ending, well, go ahead and start writing the beginning. You don't have to have all three parts of the novel, the beginning, middle, and end, in your mind, complete, word for word, before you start writing. If you come up with a great ending for a novel, then yeah, go ahead and write that ending. Most people would say, wait a second, how can I write the ending? I don't have a beginning. Well, that's fine. As long as you get something down on paper, as you're writing, you would be amazed at how much more ideas come to you. This is what Stephen King does. He comes up with a spark of the idea for the novel. He doesn't know how it's going to end, but he has an idea for the beginning. So he sits down and he starts writing, and he just keeps on writing. And as he's writing, new ideas come to him. So he adds that, and he adds more and more until he has about a 500-page novel. Sometimes the ideas don't come to him, so he has a short story. And then one day he will sell a collection of short stories in one book. But Stephen King always says that all of his ideas start off as a short story, that he just keeps adding more and more ideas until it becomes a really big book and he can sell it as one. As a writer, if you don't have the beginning or the middle, just the ending, then yes, you can sit down and start writing whatever you have. Even if you have just a bunch of ideas floating around in your head, get them all down on paper on point form. Then you can rearrange them. It's similar to when you put together a puzzle. You don't always start in the one spot. Sometimes you might create the top left corner, then you create the bottom, then you create the middle, and then the next thing you know, you're able to take these big giant pieces of one side to the next and combine them into one. And then all of a sudden you realize you're pretty much done your puzzle. Same thing with writing a novel. You can write the beginning, maybe the ending, a little bit of the middle, and then all of a sudden you realize, wait a second, I got a full novel here. I just have to add in a few missing pieces. Margaret Mitchell said that she came up with the ending to Gone with the Wind and then wrote backwards. So a lot of mystery writers will solve their mysteries at the end, right at the very beginning. They know who the murderer is. They know how the crime was committed. So that allows them to go back and create the beginning. They may not have had the beginning at all. They just had the ending. But by writing it down, all of a sudden ideas came to them that would not have come to them if they had just kept it in their head. Ask any successful writer, when you come up with an idea, do you have the beginning, middle, and end all worked out completely in your head, word for word, before you start writing? The vast majority of writers will laugh and say, not at all. They have maybe the beginning. They have no idea how it's going to end, but they just start writing anyway. And as they're writing, they find their story. Sometimes the story that they find is complete opposite to the beginning. It doesn't match up. The story changes, but that's fine because they just go back and change the beginning. And when you read the story, you're like, wow, how did you come up with this entire story in your mind? Where did you get your ideas from? The fact is, a writer will tell you that they just had a rough idea for the beginning, and they had no idea of the middle or end, but they just made it up as they went along. And after 2 or 3 rewrites, they found their novel. It's like a train track. It looks like the writer had the entire story in their mind right from the very beginning. But successful writers will tell you that they're making it up as they go along. But then they have to go back and rewrite it a couple of times just to make sure the beginning, middle, and end match up. And it makes them look like they knew what they were doing right from the beginning. But they will tell you different. One of the worst things you can do as a writer is come up with a brilliant ending and then keep waiting until the beginning. But then something happens. You forget your ending. And there's nothing worse than having a brilliant idea for a novel, and then you're waiting for the ending to come to you. But because no ending comes to you, you keep putting off writing. And then one day you want to sit down and write that novel, but then the idea for the novel just isn't there anymore. And you realize, why didn't I start writing it right away? This is why it's so important. When you're a writer, just always have a notepad with you. Write down ideas. If an idea for a story comes to you, write it down. It might take even 10 years for you to write that novel. But when you go back and look at your notes 10 years later, you're reminded of that story, something that you have completely forgotten, and now you're able to start writing it. Not all ideas that you come up with are going to be made into a full-length novel, but it's always good just to keep notes. If you come up with the middle of a story but not the beginning or end, write it down, because you never know when a couple of days later you might think, now I do have the beginning. But instead of having your notes, if you didn't write it down, you forgot in the middle. But by having those notes written down, it reminds you. So now you can start that novel. Remember, you don't have to start right at the beginning on the first word, first line, which so many writers feel they do. If you have any part of your novel in your head, even a rough idea, start writing it down. You would be amazed at how fast you could start writing once you get the ball rolling. Some writers are really good at writing dialogue, but the problem is that they have to keep writing the scenes in the environment and what else is happening, all the action, and they lose the ability to write the dialogue, because dialogue can go through your mind quickly. And when you write it all down quickly, it sounds natural. The problem is that a lot of times writers spend too much time writing all the action that the dialogue ends up sounding stiff. Well, one of the things you can do as a new writer is write down the dialogue. Forget about everything else. Forget about all the details in the background and what the characters are doing. Just write down the dialogue. As it goes through your mind, quickly write it down. Or, even better, have an audio recorder. Use your cell phone and just say the dialogue out loud as though you were in a conversation with someone. Some of the best writers in the world record their novels out loud before they even write it. This is why their dialogue sounds so real and natural, because we can speak faster than we can type. If you have dialogue in your head and you're trying to write it down and you're trying to correct the spelling along the way, you lose your train of thought and that dialogue ends up sounding stiff. You don't want this to happen. If you can type really fast, then write down all the dialogue. Forget about all the little tags and descriptions and background events. Just write down the dialogue or record it and then play it back and write down what you recorded, your own voice saying, and having the dialogue sounding natural. As a writer, one of the things you don't want to do is just sit down and stare at your laptop, waiting for an idea to come to you. If you stare at a white screen, that's all you're going to see in your mind is a white screen. So one of the worst things you can do is just sit there and wait at your computer for an idea to come to you. The most successful writers will tell you that ideas don't come to you when you want them to. Go for a walk. Stephen King always says he likes to go for a walk, and while he's walking, an idea just suddenly comes to him. It's this, look what happened when he wrote the novel Cujo about a rabid dog. He was having car trouble, so he went to a man's house who lived on a farm. And when he went to get out of the car, a big giant St. Bernard stared at him and started barking. That idea suddenly brought an idea to him about what would happen if that dog had rabies. and he was trapped in his car on this man's farm, and nobody knew where he was. While Stephen King was on the way to that man's farm, he had no idea that he was going to be coming up with a novel that would sell millions, that would be made into a movie. But when he got there, all of a sudden he looked at this big massive dog that was growling at him, and the idea, the spark, it just came to him. Did he know exactly how it was going to end? No, he didn't, but it didn't stop him. He went home and started writing a story about being trapped inside of a car with a rabid St. Bernard circling the car and nobody knowing you're there. As he was writing it, the story just started writing itself, and he came up with the ending. Because as a writer, you never know where your ideas are going to come from. And it's important to always just keep your eyes and ears open, because you never know where that spark, that idea, is going to come from. And if you come up with the ending first, then go ahead and write it. If you come up with the beginning without an ending, go ahead and write it. If you have a bunch of ideas in your head that you're not really sure of, well, then just write that as well. Get them all down in point form. Rearrange them. Give yourself some time. You can put the notes that you made away and come back to it a few weeks later. But don't do what a lot of new writers do and feel that they have to start on page 1, line 1, and write from the first chapter right to the very end. As a writer, you can start anywhere you want. Go back and make any changes. If you're nearing the end and you don't like the beginning, go ahead and change it. If you finish your novel and you come up with a better ending, go back and change it. Nothing is written in stone. Always remember that you can always make changes to anything you've written. If you like this video, be sure to check out my website. I'll leave a link down below. And you will find there a ton of blogs with a tremendous amount of information that can help you become a successful writer as soon as possible. Because I want to see your book in the bookstores, and I want to read your novel. In fact, I have this other video right here that you can click on right now, and it deals with, are you too old to start writing a novel? At what age do you have to start writing? Be sure to watch that video.